Hello BookTube, I'm Jonathan, and recently I read two sci-fi books that are at the opposite end of the sci-fi spectrum. One is pretty loosey-goosey with the science, and the other is about as technical as it gets. But what's interesting is I think they both cover some rather similar themes, and I had some rather similar takeaways. And that's what I love about science fiction, that within the genre you can have two different books take entirely different approaches in order to create sci-fi that's intellectually and emotionally stimulating. So let's get started with our softer sci-fi book, Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. Sea of Tranquility is a time travel novel that takes place over 500 years. There are 4 timelines set in 1912, 2020, 2203, and 2401. The central mystery in the book is unraveling how these timelines are connected and how they affect each other. I recently read Station 11 by Mandel and absolutely loved it. And something I noticed while reading both of these books is how quickly I became comfortable with the prose. I instantly felt like there was a steady hand at the wheel because Mandel's writing has a warmth to it and an ability to convey atmosphere and emotion without being verbose. I felt like the style and characters in the first few timelines had a distinct feel from each other. But a minor criticism I had was that the 2203 and 2401 timelines did feel a little bit similar. I think Mandel did a better job with the human aspects of the story than the technological aspects. I also thought that the main character in the 2401 timeline was possibly the least interesting of the primary characters. As you go through a book, you hope to enjoy it more and more, whereas I feel like Sea of Tranquility started really strong, and then it started to lose me just a little bit in the middle. Now, an interesting element of the story is that one of the characters is an author who wrote a pandemic book before a pandemic happened. Now, as you may know, Mandel herself wrote Station 11, a book about a superflu in 2014. So you can see through this character how she processed some of those experiences she had in 2020. Now, you might be thinking, do I really want to read a pandemic book? And that's a valid reaction. It isn't something that particularly drew me to this book in the first place, but what I will say is that I think it explores a range of different human experiences and relationships that take place outside of a pandemic setting. So I wouldn't let that be something that puts you off from trying this book. Another thing to note is that one of the characters in the novel is a character from another Mandel book, The Glass House. Now, I haven't read The Glass House, and I didn't feel like this impacted my reading experience. I didn't feel like I was missing anything. This character's story was still easy to follow, but perhaps there was another layer, perhaps there was something more that I could have gotten out of it had I read The Glass House first. Now, like a lot of time travel novels, there were moments where I was thinking, does this all make sense? Is that a plot hole? And like the good time travel novels do, these are explained by the end. Just as my confidence was starting to waver, the ending of this book won me back over. And on top of time travel, there are other science fiction concepts in this novel, but I don't want to spoil what they are. I'll just say that while it doesn't go into scientific depth, I think these concepts worked thematically and are things that emotionally resonated with me. And I think that's the main strength of the book. To create characters that feel true, to share experiences that feel relatable, to give words to ideas that feel meaningful. There's a certain sadness in this book, but it's paired with a sense of optimism. You could pull dozens of quotes from this book, but one that stuck with me was this. My point is, there's always something. I think, as a species, we have a desire to believe that we're living at the climax of the story. It's a kind of narcissism. We want to believe that we're uniquely important, that we're living at the end of history, that now, after all these millennia of false alarms, now is finally the worst that it's ever been, that finally we have reached the end of the world. Overall, I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I feel like the pieces flowed more smoothly in Station 11, and it was more consistently great. But Sea of Tranquility had some great high points as well. I gave it an 8.5 out of 10. And now for our hard sci-fi book, Quarantine by Greg Egan. In the year 2034, the stars go out. The bubble is placed around the solar system, blocking out the stars. But who placed the bubble there and why? These are the questions that humanity has been pondering for years. And decades later, a private investigator is given the case of finding a missing woman who disappeared from a mental institution, seemingly by walking through the walls. This is the third book I've read by Greg Egan, with Permutation City being one of my all-time favorite books. And Diaspora, while I quite enjoyed as well, I found a little bit harder to follow. Some of Diaspora went over my head. So Quarantine is another hard sci-fi book, but it starts out as a relatively accessible read. It introduces a really cool cyberpunk world with some interesting technology, especially the brain modifications. And a funny inclusion from Egan is that every time a new hardware or software is mentioned, he includes the brand name and the price for all of them. The first act of this book is awesome on both a micro and macro level. First of all, the post-bubble setting is really interesting, and Egan does a great job of exploring the consequences of the bubble on both people's day-to-day activities as well as on a more existential level. And then the missing person case is also really intriguing as our investigator tries to put together the puzzle pieces of how this person escaped from a seemingly inescapable location. And then, for better or worse, the second act of this book takes a massive turn. It dives into some theories of quantum mechanics, and it gets super heady. Now, part of me liked this just because of how interesting some of these ideas were. There are concepts in this book that I won't just be thinking about weeks from now. I'm going to be churning these ideas around in my head for decades to come. However, this does come at a cost because the plot pretty much grinds to a halt. We spend a significant portion of this book inside the main character's head trying to understand these concepts. And I don't mind technical writing or info dumps, but considering just how intriguing that initial hook was, it felt a little bit underwhelming that we were then given such slow plot progression. Now, often when people talk about Greg Egan, they focus on the hard sci-fi, which is absolutely fair, but I almost never hear people talk about his prose. And while his writing can be dry at times, I think he has a remarkable ability to craft his words in a powerful way. And I just wanted to share some of my favorite quotes from Quarantine. As for the stars, they were never ours to lose. The truth is, we've lost nothing but the illusion of their proximity. Maybe we'll plot and conspire to prove that we're free to plot and conspire, but in the end, it will be nothing but a conspiracy of obedience. This is what it means to be human, slaughtering the people we might have been. Egan might be a technical writer, but I think he's capable of dropping absolute bars. And this enables him to effectively pair science with philosophy. Because on top of quantum mechanics, this book also explores the relationships between science and religion, free will and determinism. Overall, for me, this didn't reach the heights of Permutation City, but I was able to follow along a little bit more than I was with Diaspora, and enjoyed it a little bit more as well. I gave this the same score as Sea of Tranquility, an 8.5 out of 10. So there you go, those are two completely different sci-fi books that I enjoyed a very similar amount. And what's interesting is I think that both of these books could be boiled down to a single quote from each of them. And these quotes have some parallels. I won't share what they are, but if you're interested in discussing them, if you've read the books or just want to hear what they are, join us on Discord and we can chat about that in the latest video discussion channel. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash or just gently click the subscribe button. And if you really enjoyed it, consider checking out the perks of becoming a Patreon member, where you can become one of my robots, androids, or cyborgs, like Nima, a New Eden, Half-Ogre, Zakawe, Samil, and the Simulated Colin. And you can find more sci-fi content over here.